Have you ever wondered, why him? Out of the entire human race, why was Noah the only one chosen to survive the most catastrophic event the world had ever seen? Think about it. Millions of lives wiped out, a civilization brought to its knees by endless waves, and in the middle of it all, one man, one ark, and a mission from God himself. What made Noah so different? Was it just blind luck? Was he perfect? Or is there something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of this ancient tale that still echoes through history, religion, and even modern headlines today? In the next few moments, I'm going to take you on a journey that will not only answer that question, but might also shift how you see yourself, your faith, and the challenges in your own life. So don't blink, don't scroll, because the answer you came looking for is right here, and it starts now. Let's be real. Life today can sometimes feel like a flood, can it? Whether it's rising bills, broken relationships, mental health struggles, or simply the feeling that the world is spinning faster than we can hold on, there's something deeply personal about the story of Noah. That's what makes this ancient narrative more than just a Sunday school lesson. It's a mirror. And as we unpack Noah's life, his choices, and what God saw in him that the rest of the world ignored, you might just begin to see a reflection of your own journey. Because here's the thing, God didn't choose Noah because he was flawless. He chose him because of something else entirely. And if you stay with me to the end of this video, you're going to discover what that is and why it still matters today more than ever. Before we dive deep into the stormy waters of Noah's time, I want you to do one thing. Picture the world he lived in. This wasn't just a morally confused society. It was a place drenched in wickedness, where right and wrong had become twisted beyond recognition. Sound familiar? It should. The world we live in today isn't all that different, and that's exactly why Noah's story hits so hard in 2025. You've probably seen the headlines: natural disasters increasing, global tensions rising, spiritual values being challenged. It's no coincidence that more and more people are searching for terms like end times prophecy, Bible truth, why God allows suffering, and real stories from Genesis. The digital flood is rising, my friend, and people are looking for the ark. Could Noah's story be the blueprint we've been missing all along? Now, here's where it gets interesting, and I need you to stay with me because this next part is going to shape everything that comes after. You see, most people think they know the story of Noah. He built a big boat, gathered the animals, survived the flood, and started over. But there's a mystery buried right at the center of this story that most never see. The Bible doesn't say much about Noah's childhood or his early life. It doesn't give us long descriptions of his achievements, his education, or even his personality. Instead, it gives us one powerful statement: Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's it. That's the entire reason the greatest rescue mission in history began with this one man. But what does that mean, grace? Was it earned? Was it gifted? And more importantly, can it happen again with us? Stick with me, because in the next few minutes we're going to peel back layers of misunderstanding, go beyond the children's book images of animals on a boat, and uncover a raw, real, and riveting story of what it truly means to be chosen by God. And I'm not just going to tell you what happened. I'm going to show you why it happened, how Noah responded to the impossible, and how that same faith can be ignited inside you. This isn't a history lesson. It's a survival guide for the soul. If you've ever felt like the world around you is crumbling, if you've ever questioned your purpose or wondered if God sees you, then this story is your story. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt overlooked? Like no matter how hard you try to do what's right, it doesn't seem to matter in a world that celebrates the opposite? That's exactly where Noah was. He was surrounded by violence, corruption, and people who had turned their backs on the very Creator who gave them life. But Noah didn't follow the crowd. He walked a different path. He chose obedience over popularity. He chose faith over fear. And that simple, quiet resistance, that inner strength when no one else was watching, was what caught God's attention. Think about that for a second. In a world that rewards the loudest, flashiest, most visible people, God noticed the man who quietly walked with him. That's the twist. That's the turning point. And if you're someone who's ever tried to live with integrity in secret when no one applauded, when no one even noticed, you're already more like Noah than you think. As we move deeper into the story, I want to introduce you to some of the key players, not just Noah, but his family, the people around him, and yes, the God who watched it all unfold. But here's the master move I promised you earlier. This story isn't just about them. It's about you. Every moment, every decision, every word you're about to hear will hold up a mirror to your own life. And that's exactly why you need to stay with me until the end. Because you didn't click on this video just to be entertained. You clicked because something inside you is searching. Maybe for clarity, maybe for truth, or maybe just to know that when the floodwaters rise in your own life, there's still a way to survive. There is. And it starts with knowing what God saw in Noah and what he still sees in people today. Now, let's set the stage a little more. The world before the flood wasn't some distant, fairy tale place. It was a civilization rich in culture, technology, and advancement, yes, even by ancient standards. People were building cities, trading goods, raising families. But with all that growth came pride. People began to believe they no longer needed God. Morality collapsed. Violence spread. And worst of all, the hearts of men grew cold. The Bible says that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's not just bad, that's total moral bankruptcy. But in the middle of that darkness, a light remained. One man, one family, one chance to start again. Can you see the conflict now? It wasn't just a story of boats and rain. It was a war between faith and evil, between one man's obedience and a world gone mad. And here's where the tension really builds. God made a decision that would reshape history. But before the first raindrop ever fell, before the first board of the ark was laid, God saw something in Noah. Something rare. Something precious. And that brings us right back to you. Because I believe you're watching this for a reason. I don't believe in accidents. And maybe, just maybe, the same grace that found Noah all those generations ago is now reaching toward you, in your moment of uncertainty, in your own rising flood. So let's keep going, because what happens next is going to shake you, inspire you, and maybe even prepare you for your own ark moment. But just when you think you've got the story figured out, just when the rain starts to fall and the ark begins to float, something unexpected happens. Something that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the story and about why Noah was truly chosen. When the story picks back up, we're not staring at an ark cutting through turbulent waters just yet. Instead, we're pulled back into the rhythm of a man's life before the storm, into the world Noah walked through day after day. A world so far gone that even the heavens grieved. But here's what most people don't realize. Noah wasn't just sitting on a mountaintop meditating when God found him. He was living in the middle of chaos, surrounded by neighbors who mocked his beliefs, by leaders drunk on power, and by a culture that had completely abandoned any sense of spiritual or moral compass. This wasn't a quiet, peace-loving society. It was a ticking time bomb of pride, violence, and self-worship. And yet, through it all, Noah kept showing up. He tilled his land, raised his family, and held on to values that were quickly becoming extinct. The trending search term, Bible prophecy being fulfilled, isn't just a modern-day curiosity. It was the reality Noah lived, except back then, he was the only one paying attention. Now imagine being the only one left trying to do the right thing. Everyone else is moving in the opposite direction. There's temptation everywhere. Violence isn't hidden, it's celebrated. The powerful exploit the weak, and faith in God is mocked openly in the streets. You try to raise your sons with values, but they come home with stories of how even their peers laugh at the idea of righteousness. People you once respected now indulge in things they once called evil. And yet, Noah doesn't cave. That alone makes you wonder, what was his secret? Was he a man of steel? Did he never doubt? Or was it something deeper, a kind of daily decision, forged quietly in his soul, to trust God even when there were no signs to reassure him? The relationships around him were complex too. His wife, though barely mentioned in the biblical text, must have been an anchor. Imagine the conversations they had in private, late at night, after hearing another story of violence, after seeing more neighbors fall into corruption. How do you hold on to hope in a hopeless world? Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, weren't angels, but they followed their father's lead. That alone was a miracle in a generation so morally bankrupt. And yet, we can't help but ask, did they ever doubt him? Did they think he was losing his mind when he started gathering wood and claiming he'd heard from God? That's where the emotional tension truly sits. Not just in the building of the ark, but in the quiet moments leading up to it. The relationships tested, the faith stretched, the world pushing in from all sides. And here's where the mystery deepens. We know Noah stood apart, but what if there were others? People who were once faithful but fell away? Friends who used to walk beside him but gradually changed as the culture grew darker. Think about it. Could there have been someone in Noah's past, a former confidant, a childhood companion, maybe even a family member, who once believed as he did, but made different choices when the world offered them power or comfort? These silent betrayals leave scars, and perhaps part of Noah's strength wasn't just his connection with God, but also the pain of watching people he cared for surrender to a darkness he refused to accept. Some scholars speculate, though not often discussed in mainstream teachings, that there might have been others who claimed to hear from divine sources, or others building their own answers to survival, perhaps even rival theories to Noah's divine command. This introduces an eerie possibility, red herrings that make us question if Noah was truly alone in believing something catastrophic was coming. Could there have been other warnings, dreams, visions, whispers that went ignored? Did anyone else hear God but choose silence because the price of obedience was too high? And here's something to chew on. What if someone actively worked against Noah, not out of disbelief, but out of jealousy or fear that he might be right? The deeper we go, the more tangled the story becomes. The people in Noah's community weren't cartoon villains. They were real, with motivations, ambitions, insecurities. Some may have scoffed at Noah out of pride. Others, perhaps, out of heartbreak, angry at a God they felt had abandoned them. And buried within that bitterness may have been individuals who tried to sabotage Noah's efforts quietly. Maybe they spread rumors. Maybe they tried to turn his sons against him. Or perhaps someone even pretended to be an ally, while slowly undermining the mission from within. The tension wasn't just in the skies preparing to break open, it was in the community cracking under moral rot. But what about Noah himself? Even the strongest men bend under pressure. We're not told every thought he had, but can you imagine the emotional toll? Every day he had to stand tall while others laughed. He had to keep building long before the first cloud ever darkened the sky. It wasn't raining yet. The earth looked just fine. People were still partying, still marrying, still building their legacies. And yet here was Noah, gathering materials, mapping out the strange dimensions of a vessel no one had ever seen before, driven by a divine voice that, to everyone else, sounded like madness. You search, is God still speaking today? Or how to hear from God, and you'll find millions of viewers trying to discern what Noah had already learned, to walk in obedience without proof, to trust a whisper when everyone else is screaming in the opposite direction. That's the kind of faith that doesn't just build an ark, it moves heaven. But the cost? Isolation, ridicule, doubt, not just from enemies but from within. And here's a chilling thought. What if, in those long years of building, Noah occasionally questioned whether he really heard from God? What if there were moments of silence, so deafening that he almost gave up? Those are the kinds of questions that don't get answered in the verses, but they live in the heart of anyone who's ever stepped out in faith and been met with silence. As we inch closer to the moment where the rain finally begins to fall, we're still left with haunting uncertainty. Why Noah? Why was he the one whose obedience was chosen to rewrite history? And what if someone else had tried to claim that place, someone who wasn't truly faithful, but pretended to be? That would change everything. Because then this wouldn't just be a story about survival, it would be a story of deception, rivalry, and spiritual warfare playing out in the shadows of a collapsing world. And that leads us to the real question, the one we haven't answered yet. Was Noah truly the only one God could have used, or was he the only one who still said yes? As Noah's story continues to unfold, the tension doesn't ease, it sharpens. You'd think that once he committed to God's plan, things would start falling into place, right? But the reality was the opposite. The moment Noah began gathering materials and laying the first beams of the ark, things began to shift around him in strange and unsettling ways. Tools went missing. Workers he trusted disappeared without warning. Timber he had set aside was found burned in the morning, reduced to ash, without a trace of how it happened. And while there were those who mocked him openly, there were also some who began to act strangely silent, too silent, watching him work from a distance with unreadable expressions. Something about it felt off. As if someone somewhere didn't just disbelieve in the flood, they were actively trying to stop the ark from ever being completed. It wasn't just resistance anymore. It was sabotage. And then came the whispers. Noah started hearing things from people he thought he could trust. Small remarks like, "Maybe you should stop talking so loudly about what God told you," or "Not everyone wants to be reminded of judgment, Noah." These weren't just neighbors or strangers. These were people he had known for years. Friends from his youth. Men he'd broken bread with. Their tone wasn't dismissive, it was cautionary, even threatening at times. One night, under the cover of darkness, someone left a crude carving near his workshop. "Stop before you ruin us all." It sent a chill through Noah that not even the warmest fire could shake. And in that moment, something clicked. This wasn't just about a man and a boat anymore. There were powers at work, human and maybe even spiritual, that didn't want the truth to surface. The ark wasn't just a vessel, it was a threat. And if Noah completed it, everything hidden would come to light. But the danger didn't stop at veiled threats or missing resources. One evening, while inspecting the storage area for food supplies, Noah discovered something alarming. Several sacks of grain had been slit open from underneath. Carefully, deliberately. It wasn't an animal. Someone had gone out of their way to damage their future provisions. He didn't tell his sons at first, not wanting to scare them, but the evidence was undeniable. Someone on the inside was working against them. Could it be one of the hired hands from nearby villages? A local supplier who had secretly aligned with those hoping Noah would fail? Or, and this was the worst possibility of all, could it be someone from his own household? That fear began to grow as he recalled certain recent interactions, glances that lingered too long, questions that felt a little too probing. His son Ham, while loyal in many ways, had begun showing signs of frustration. He often challenged Noah's decisions, questioned whether it was necessary to build the ark exactly to God's specifications. He complained about how they were becoming the town's outcasts. Once, in anger, Ham even said, "What if you're wrong, Father? What if you're just hearing what you want to hear?" That question stuck in Noah's mind long after the conversation ended. Was it just teenage rebellion or something deeper? Could resentment open a door for betrayal? But Noah's unease wasn't limited to his family. There was a man, Ezer, a distant cousin from his mother's side, who had reappeared out of nowhere after years of silence. He claimed he'd heard about Noah's project and wanted to help, offering strong hands and experience with construction. On the surface, he seemed genuine. But there was something unsettling about his presence. How he always arrived just after a setback, how he always asked about the ark's dimensions, how he pressed Noah for details about God's exact words. He said all the right things, but his eyes never smiled. One night, Noah followed him after their evening chores, staying just out of sight. Ezer met with a group of men deep in the forest, speaking in hushed tones. Noah couldn't make out every word, but he heard enough to know. Ezer wasn't just here to help. He was spying, watching, maybe even preparing to destroy everything Noah was building. And then, just as Noah was preparing to confront him, the blueprints, the ones with the exact instructions from God, vanished. Not the physical ark plans, but the scroll where Noah had recorded the vision, the measurements, and the words he believed God had whispered to him in the silence of early morning. Gone. No sign of a break-in. No prints. No mess. Just gone. As if it had never existed. That scroll had been his lifeline, his only physical confirmation of the voice he had heard. Without it, doubt crept in again like a slow leak. Did he remember the details exactly? Did he miss something? Was someone now using it against him, possibly building their own vessel? Or worse, twisting God's message for their own gain? That loss shook him. But what hit even harder was the realization that someone close knew exactly where he kept it. It was hidden beneath a loose stone in the back room. Only his family knew about it, which brought him back to the growing unease that maybe the danger wasn't outside the Ark walls, maybe it was already inside. And just when he thought the pressure couldn't mount any higher, a stranger appeared at the edge of his land. She was veiled, traveling alone, and her voice carried a strange authority. She warned Noah, cryptically, saying, "There are forces that remember what happened before, forces that do not want it to happen again." Before he could ask her what she meant, she disappeared into the woods, leaving behind only a pendant with ancient markings unlike anything Noah had seen before. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. One that implied that what was coming had happened before, and that there were secrets even Noah didn't know. What could she have meant by that? And why was he only learning this now? The truth was slipping farther away, just as the flood drew near. While Noah grappled with the unsettling disappearance of his sacred scroll and the cryptic message from the veiled stranger, something entirely unexpected began unfolding beyond his sight, a secondary thread quietly twisting its way into the heart of the mystery, pulling someone else into the tangled web of divine secrets and looming judgment. His eldest son, Shem, who had always appeared steadfast and supportive, started to experience strange dreams, vivid, detailed visions that left him shaken and silent in the mornings. At first, he dismissed them, chalking them up to stress or imagination stirred by all the talk of destruction. But the dreams didn't fade. Instead, they intensified. And in each one, he saw the Ark, not as a vessel of salvation, but as something different. A warning, a symbol. Sometimes it was burning. Other times it floated in a sea of shadows, surrounded not by animals and life, but by eyes, thousands of watching eyes, human and not, as if waiting for a mistake. What frightened him most was that in these dreams, he wasn't standing beside his father. He was alone, and the sky, always the sky, would crack with thunder, not rain, but voices, screaming words he didn't understand. Shem finally told his younger brother Japheth, hoping for comfort, or at least shared confusion. But Japheth's reaction stunned him, because he had been having similar dreams, too. The symbols were different, but the unease was the same. He spoke of a giant serpent encircling the base of the Ark, whispering in an ancient tongue, slithering into corners of their world they couldn't see while awake. And when they confided in their father, hoping for answers, Noah didn't react the way they expected. Instead of offering clarity, he looked stricken, pale, as if something they said confirmed a fear he hadn't voiced. He stepped back from them, murmured something about the forgotten ones, and left without another word. That moment shifted something. The sons began to wonder. What wasn't their father telling them? Had Noah seen things he hadn't shared? Were these dreams just signs of stress, or were they linked to something far older than even the flood? Then, a physical clue surfaced, buried in the ground behind the family's oldest storage shed. While clearing space for animal supplies, Shem unearthed a strange, metallic box, ornately carved, sealed with no visible keyhole, and covered in markings that matched the pendant left by the veiled woman. It had clearly been there for decades, maybe longer. It looked ancient, out of place. Inside the box was a fragment of parchment, preserved against the rot of time. But the words written there contradicted everything they thought they knew. It spoke of another man, one chosen, long before Noah, who was given a similar command. A man who failed. A man whose name had been struck from records, whose betrayal was so deep that God erased him from history. This man had also been told to build. He had also been warned. But somewhere along the way, he twisted the command, thinking he could outsmart fate. The flood had been delayed, it seemed, not because the people changed, but because God gave humanity another chance, through someone before Noah. That man had vanished. No one knew how or why. But this new clue suggested that someone, perhaps even the veiled woman, hadn't forgotten him. The revelation sent waves of doubt through Noah's household. Was he the first chosen or the last chance? Was he truly God's only servant left, or simply the only one who hadn't fallen yet? And the pendant, it now seemed like more than just a warning. It was a key to a secret hidden for generations, a truth so buried that even Noah hadn't spoken of it. As his sons looked at their father now, they began to see a man haunted not just by the future, but by the past. A past that might involve betrayal, failure, and a promise that had once been broken by someone he had known, perhaps even loved. Meanwhile, whispers began reaching the outskirts of their land. Strangers traveling from distant regions arrived under the guise of trade, but they asked too many questions. They seemed far too curious about Noah's timeline, the ark's size, the progress of construction. One even slipped and called it the second ark, a phrase no one in Noah's household had ever used aloud. When pressed, the man denied saying it, then disappeared the next morning. It was as if outside forces were watching the clock, waiting to see if Noah would succeed where someone else had failed. And the more they built, the more they were watched, not just by men, but by creatures whose eyes glowed in the tree line, vanishing before they could be fully seen. Animals avoided those woods now. Birds stopped singing near certain groves. It was as though nature itself had turned wary. Noah, once so confident in his instructions, now carried an unease that made him distant. He spoke less. He prayed more. Sometimes, late at night, his wife would find him staring at the stars, not in wonder, but in fear. He confessed to her, quietly, that the scroll hadn't just held measurements, it had contained names. Names of others who were supposed to survive. But those names, they were now gone. Erased. And he couldn't remember them. He feared something or someone had tampered with his mind. That's when he began carving symbols into the beams of the ark, protections he claimed had been shown to him in dreams he no longer trusted. Now, with mounting tension inside and strange forces circling from outside, the entire household stands at the edge of something much darker than a storm. There are too many unanswered questions. Was the flood really meant for judgment, or for protection from something worse? And if others had been chosen before, what happened to them? Were they dead or still out there, hiding in plain sight? And then, as if destiny itself was tipping the balance again, the veiled woman returned. Only this time, she wasn't alone. The arrival of the veiled woman for the second time brought a silence that swallowed the air around Noah's household. This time, she did not speak in riddles or vanish into the shadows. She came with urgency, her cloak soaked from the rising mists of dawn, and in her trembling hands she carried a carved staff, one that bore the same symbols etched on the box Shem had unearthed. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a child, no older than 10, with eyes that seemed too ancient for his age, wide and watchful, reflecting a sadness far beyond his years. The woman did not explain who the boy was. She simply said, "They've found you. You don't have much time." Then she collapsed before she could say another word. Noah rushed to her side, but the look in her eyes was empty. She was gone. No wound, no blood, just gone, as though something had taken her final breath from inside. The boy remained silent, unmoving, never blinking, only staring at Noah with a gaze that seemed to plead and warn at the same time. That moment shattered whatever small sense of order Noah still clung to. A woman who knew things she shouldn't, who had once disappeared like a ghost, had now died at his feet without explanation. A child appeared with no name, no words, and yet somehow felt like a witness to a story older than the flood itself. Noah's mind began spiraling. Was this part of the divine plan, or something else entirely? Was this a punishment for not finishing the ark fast enough, or had he crossed into a realm of secrets meant to stay buried? His hands trembled as he carried the woman's body into the woods, choosing a secluded place beneath the trees where the earth felt undisturbed by human history. But as he dug, he couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched. He didn't see anything at first, only the shadows of trees dancing with the wind. But then, just beyond the edge of the brush, a shape moved, too slow to be an animal, too quick to be human. When he turned to face it, it was gone. Not a sound, not a footprint, just the kind of silence that follows something unnatural. That night, the fear clawed into his dreams, pulling him into a realm where fire rained from the sky and voices laughed from beneath the earth. He saw himself screaming inside the ark as waters rushed in through cracks that hadn't been there before. His sons were gone. The animals floated lifeless. The boy, the same boy who now slept in their home, stood in the water, completely dry, whispering in a language Noah didn't understand. He awoke gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, and ran outside to clear his head, but the sense of dread followed. And that's when he noticed the markings. They were etched into the doorway of the storage barn. The same symbols he'd been carving onto the ark's beams were now reversed, mirrored like a curse mocking the protection he thought he was invoking. Someone had come close. Someone had crossed into their sanctuary and left a message. He called for his sons, but no one answered. Panic set in immediately. He sprinted through the compound, checking rooms, calling out. Shem and Japheth were still asleep, confused by his shouting. But Ham was missing. His bed was untouched, his shoes still neatly placed near the door. No signs of a struggle, no clues as to where he went. Only the pendant, the one left by the veiled woman, was now sitting on his pillow. Noah's heart sank as he picked it up, the cold metal burning against his skin. The boy watched silently from the corner of the room. Still no words. Just that same haunted stare. Noah began to unravel. Every instinct screamed that something far more sinister than a flood was on its way. He tried to tell himself this was a test, that faith required struggle, but this felt different. This wasn't trial. This was warning. The kind that comes before a storm no ark can withstand. He questioned everyone, his sons, the servants, even the animals. Anything strange? Any noise? Anyone unfamiliar? No one saw anything. It was as if Ham had simply evaporated into thin air. Noah remembered their last conversation, the doubt in Ham's voice, the frustration, the questions about whether all of this was even real. He had argued with Noah about the resources, asking if maybe they should be preparing for war instead of rain. Had he left willingly? Or had he been taken by something he didn't understand? The only answer Noah had was that nothing in his world made sense anymore. Every truth he thought he stood on now felt like it could crumble beneath his feet. And then came the message, delivered not by a person, but by fire. A section of the ark's framework was found burned, deep within the lower deck, where no torch had been lit. There were no embers, no trail, just a blackened message scrawled in ash on the wall. You are not the first. You will not be the last. Noah stared at it for what felt like hours. The implications settled like stones in his chest. This was no longer just about survival. This was about erasure. Someone or something wanted his story to vanish like the others. And now that he had uncovered too much, they were closing in. The boy remained silent, never sleeping, always watching. And the flood hadn't even started yet. Just when Noah thought he had pieced together the outline of the chaos unraveling around him, just when he had come to terms with the terrifying truth that his mission might have been part of a much larger and far more sinister plan, everything took a turn he never could have seen coming. It happened in the quietest hour of the night, when even the wind seemed to pause. The boy, who had remained a silent shadow in their home for days, finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and strangely mature for someone so young. He walked into Noah's quarters, looked him directly in the eyes, and said with chilling clarity, "You've been asking the wrong questions. The flood isn't meant to save the world. It's meant to erase the mistake you made." Noah froze. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. He tried to ask what the boy meant, but the child held up a hand and said, "I'll show you." Then, without waiting for permission, he walked out into the moonlight and led Noah deep into the woods behind their land, far beyond where the trees felt familiar. They reached a clearing that had no right to be there, perfectly circular and deathly silent, the grass dead and the air thick with something unnatural. In the center was a stone altar, cracked down the middle, covered in moss and dirt. The boy approached it and placed his palm against its surface, whispering something under his breath. At first, nothing happened, but then the ground beneath them trembled, and the stone split open to reveal a hidden chamber below. Noah stepped back in disbelief. This wasn't a shrine. It was a vault, and carved along the walls of the chamber were murals, ancient, faded illustrations of a story that predated everything Noah thought he knew. What he saw changed everything. The murals told of a man who had once been chosen, just as Noah had been. This man had been warned of a great cleansing to come. He had built an ark, gathered the animals, obeyed every instruction. But when the flood came, he made a different choice. He turned back. He didn't follow through. Not out of disobedience, but because he discovered a deeper truth, one that terrified him. The flood, according to the murals, wasn't God's only solution. It was a method of containment. The floodwaters were meant to trap something, not cleanse humanity. Something ancient. Something buried beneath the surface of the world, sealed long ago and stirred by man's growing wickedness. The ark wasn't salvation. It was insulation. A way to shield a small remnant while something darker was locked away again. Noah stared at the images, the realization slowly washing over him like icy water. His mission hadn't been about preserving life. It had been about preserving order. The divine instructions he had followed so faithfully weren't just about obedience. They were about covering up a cycle that had already happened once before. But then came the real twist, the moment that shattered whatever fragments of truth he thought remained. The final mural showed not just the ancient chosen man who turned away. It showed someone beside him, a younger figure, a child with the same face as the boy now standing next to Noah in the vault. Noah staggered backward. His mind raced, trying to connect the impossible. "Who are you?" he whispered, barely able to form the words. The boy looked up at him and said plainly, "I was there the first time. I watched the flood come. I watched them lie about why it had to happen. I watched them blame men like you so they wouldn't have to explain what was really waking beneath the oceans." Before Noah could respond, they both heard movement from the trees above. Figures, shadowed, cloaked, surrounded the clearing, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like predators. One of them stepped forward, lowering their hood. It was Japheth, Noah's son. But his face was unreadable, his expression hollow, like a man who had made a deal long ago and was now bound by it. "You weren't supposed to find this," Japheth said quietly. "You were supposed to follow the script. Build the ark. Gather the animals. Save just enough to restart. And forget the rest." Noah's heart dropped. He looked from his son to the boy, then back to the cracked murals. Everything he had believed was unspooling right in front of him. His own family, the mission, the divine calling, it had all been part of a cycle that repeated through history, each time with a different name, a different face, but always the same outcome. Contain the truth, control the survivors, bury the past. But now, with the vault open and the murals exposed, the pattern was breaking. Someone had made sure this cycle wouldn't repeat without question. The boy hadn't come to be saved. He had come to warn Noah before the script could be rewritten again. Noah realized in that moment that he wasn't the chosen one in the way he had thought. He wasn't the first, and maybe not even the most important. He was just the latest vessel in a long line of obedient builders. But now, for the first time, he had the choice not to follow blindly. And standing in that dead clearing, surrounded by betrayal and truth and centuries-old lies, he understood the stakes had always been higher than he imagined. The flood was coming. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a real danger after all. The weight of truth pressed against Noah's chest like stone as he stumbled out of the vault, the boy close behind him. His knees were weak, his breath uneven, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing realization that everything, his calling, his mission, even the voice he believed had guided him, had been shaped by forces far older and more calculated than he had ever imagined. He could still hear Japheth's words ringing in his ears, cold and devoid of remorse, and yet laced with the quiet desperation of a man who had seen too much and chosen silence to survive. But now, silence was no longer an option. Noah couldn't unsee what had been hidden from him, couldn't return to blind obedience. And as he stepped back into the light, heart pounding, he knew there was only one path forward: confront the very people he once trusted with his life, his family. The walk back to the compound was long, and the forest seemed to close in on him as the weight of betrayal settled in his bones. When he finally arrived, Shem and Japheth were already waiting. Their expressions were unreadable, not surprised, not alarmed, almost as if they had expected him to find the truth, eventually. Noah's voice cracked as he demanded answers, his words sharp and wounded. "How long have you known?" he asked, locking eyes with Japheth, whose silence spoke louder than any confession. Shem tried to intervene, his tone gentle, almost pleading. "Father, we didn't want this. We didn't know everything, just enough to understand the consequences of digging too deep. We were told it was for the greater good, that the flood would cleanse, not deceive." But the boy, silent no longer, stepped forward and answered for them all. They were told enough to believe, but not enough to question. That's how it always works. Noah turned to his sons, betrayal thick in his throat. "You let me build that ark, knowing it was a lie?" Japheth finally spoke, his voice steady but hollow. "It wasn't a lie. It was necessary. We were chosen to survive, Father. That means something. And if that means silencing the past, then so be it." In that moment, something inside Noah broke. Not in anger, but in grief. He had sacrificed everything, his land, his peace, his standing in the community, to follow what he thought was a divine command. He had endured ridicule, isolation, and the slow erosion of trust with the outside world, all because he believed he was preserving something pure, something worth saving. And now, he was faced with a devastating choice: go along with the plan, finish the ark, seal away the truth with the coming flood, or defy everything, expose what he had seen, and risk losing not just the mission, but his family. The emotional weight of that choice tore at him. His sons stood for the survival of what they knew. The boy stood for the truth of what was buried. And Noah stood in the middle, torn between two worlds. If he chose to reveal the secret, he could be dooming the only people he had left. If he chose to stay silent, he would be complicit in the same lie that had erased others before him. That night, Noah wandered outside alone, seeking clarity. The stars offered no guidance, the sky stretched wide and merciless above him. And as he sat near the edge of the still lake, he heard footsteps approaching behind him. It was Ham, alive, but changed. He was thinner, eyes sunken, skin marked by strange symbols that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. He looked at Noah not with recognition, but with distance, like he was seeing him from across a chasm. "They showed me," he said, voice low and raspy. "They took me below, beneath the waters. There's more than just the vault. There's a prison, and something inside it is waking." Noah's heart seized. "What are you talking about?" Ham stepped closer, his voice trembling. "The flood isn't meant to protect us. It's meant to feed it." And with that, everything changed again. Noah's impossible choice had grown even more monstrous. The ark wasn't a sanctuary. It was bait, a vessel to carry life and sacrifice it. Now the question wasn't just whether to continue the mission or expose the truth. The question was whether to let the flood happen at all. If the rain came and the ark floated, they might be sealing themselves inside with the very thing they were trying to avoid. But if they stopped the flood, what would be unleashed in its place? The boy remained silent, his eyes fixed on the lake as if he could see beyond its still surface. Ham backed away into the shadows, leaving only more questions. And Noah, now surrounded by sons with conflicting truths, ancient secrets unraveling like thread, and a coming storm that might not cleanse but consume, stood paralyzed at the edge of an impossible decision. It was supposed to be over, at least. That's what Noah told himself as the first fat drops of rain finally began to fall. The sky cracked open not with gentle showers, but with a violent roar, as if the heavens were unleashing everything they had held back for centuries. But even the floodwaters, long prophesied and feared, couldn't compete with the storm of truth that had begun to unravel. Just hours before, Noah still clung to the hope that the conflict was local, contained within his family, his mission, his ark. But that illusion shattered the moment he stepped into the old council chamber, hidden deep beneath the ancient temple ruins. He hadn't meant to find it. He was chasing Ham, who had fled after the lakeside confession, his mind fractured, his voice shaking with warnings of things that dwelled beneath. But what Noah found in that chamber was far worse than anything he'd ever imagined. The walls were lined with relics, scrolls, bones, preserved fragments of maps older than any civilization he'd studied. The room pulsed with a low hum, like something alive was buried just beneath its foundation. And standing at the center, calm and calculating, was Methuselah. The man Noah had trusted more than anyone, the one who first whispered of the flood, who taught him to listen to the signs, who guided his every step from the shadows. But now, he stood surrounded by people Noah recognized, elders, neighbors, even a merchant from the eastern village who once helped smuggle supplies for the ark. They weren't innocent bystanders. They were part of it, part of something vast and old and meticulously orchestrated. Methuselah didn't flinch when Noah entered. He simply nodded, as if welcoming him to the truth. "You thought you were chosen," he said, his voice like gravel. "You thought this was about your faith, your obedience. But the ark isn't yours, Noah. It never was. It belongs to the covenant. We've built it over and over across time, each generation passing the design, modifying it, ensuring it fits the prophecy. And when the cycle completes, we flood the world again. Not to cleanse it, but to control what survives." Noah's mind reeled. "You lied to me," he hissed, every word cutting from the inside out. "You used me." Methuselah stepped forward, unshaken.
"No."
"We protected you from the truth until you were strong enough to carry it. You think you're the first builder? You're just the latest version, tailored for this generation's fear, this generation's faith. Every society needs its Noah, a symbol, a distraction. And when the flood comes, the real work begins." As Methuselah spoke, the pieces finally locked into place. The disjointed clues, the eerie precision of the ark's design, the feeling that someone had always been one step ahead, it all made sense now. Noah hadn't discovered the truth by accident. He had been allowed to find pieces, led down specific paths, all part of a performance carefully written long before he was born. And worst of all, he wasn't the only one they had manipulated. His wife, his neighbors. Even the animals chosen for the ark weren't random. Some were meant to be preserved, yes, but others were meant to be studied. The pressure inside Noah's chest turned to fire. "And the boy?" he asked, his voice trembling. "He's not from this time, is he?" Methuselah's eyes narrowed. "He's not what you think he is. He's a remnant from the first flood. Something we couldn't contain. Every cycle, he returns, watching, waiting, trying to break the pattern. But it always ends the same." Noah backed away, rage and betrayal boiling just beneath his skin. The flood wasn't the end. It was the reset.
And he was just a cog in the machine.
But as thunder cracked overhead and the chamber shook with the approaching storm, another realization dawned. If this cycle had played out before, maybe it could be broken. Maybe, just this once, the ark could carry not just survivors, but the truth. He turned to leave, but Methuselah raised a hand, and the chamber doors slammed shut. "You can't walk away, Noah. You've seen too much. If you leave now, the boy dies. And so do your sons." That was it. The ultimatum. Stay and let the flood erase history one more time, or risk everything, everyone, to stop it. The blood drained from Noah's face as he stood at the crossroads of faith and rebellion. His heart pounded, his breath short. He had always believed obedience was righteousness. But now, with the water rising, with the lies exposed, he had to ask himself, what was he really obeying? Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded. Not the call to board, but a warning. The flood had begun. And Noah knew in his bones that this time, the world wasn't ready for what was coming. Noah's breath came in ragged bursts as the floodwaters surged closer, relentless and unforgiving, swallowing the land he once called home. The ancient chamber beneath the temple still echoed with Methuselah's cold words, the weight of the conspiracy pressing down like the storm overhead. There was no turning back now. The truth had been laid bare, and every step he took brought him deeper into the heart of a darkness that stretched across generations. But Noah was no longer the man who had built the ark with unquestioning faith. He was a man armed with painful knowledge and burning resolve. It was time to confront the architect of this cruel cycle, Methuselah, and demand the answers that could either save what was left or doom them all. The heavy chamber doors slammed behind him, sealing him in a prison of stone and shadow. Methuselah's eyes gleamed with a mixture of triumph and something darker, perhaps pity. You don't understand, Noah. The flood is inevitable. It's the balance the world demands. We keep the cycle, or everything collapses into chaos. You were meant to be part of that order. You were chosen to obey, not to question. Noah's fists clenched until his nails bit into his palms. Chosen?
No.
You chose to manipulate, to control. You lied to your own family, to generations of people who trusted you. I'm not a pawn in your game. His voice shook but held firm. The flood isn't a reset. It's a prison. And you're the warden. Methuselah's smile vanished, replaced by cold resolve. Then what will you do? Destroy the ark? Let the waters wash away everything and everyone? Chaos would consume us all. No, Noah's voice was steady now, burning with fierce clarity. I'll stop it. I will break this cycle, even if it costs me everything. Suddenly, the chamber shuddered violently, dust falling from the cracked ceiling as a deafening roar filled the air. The ancient seals beneath the floor began to fracture. From the depths rose a shadow unlike anything Noah had ever imagined, a massive, shifting mass of darkness and water, eyes burning with ancient fury, a presence that had waited, imprisoned, for centuries. It was the very thing Methuselah had tried to hide, the force that the floodwaters contained but could never truly silence. The boy stepped forward, no longer silent, but radiant with a strange, otherworldly light. This is what I warned you about, he said calmly. Not the flood, but what it imprisons. This is the reason they flood the earth, to keep it caged. And now it's waking. Noah's heart pounded in his chest as he faced down this living nightmare. The air thickened, charged with a power that bent reality itself. Methuselah raised his staff, chanting in an ancient tongue, desperate to hold back the rising darkness. But it was clear, the tide had turned. In a moment of brutal clarity, Noah understood what he had to do. The ark wasn't just a vessel of survival, it was a key, a lock and a shield. He raced to the altar, the mural's secrets flashing in his mind. With shaking hands, he began to recite the forgotten prayers, weaving the words of ancient faith with the truth he had uncovered. The boy stood beside him, lending his strange light to the ritual. Methuselah's voice rose in anger, but Noah pushed forward, fueled by a resolve stronger than fear or doubt. The darkness writhed, screaming in rage, as the floodwaters churned violently, threatening to consume everything. But slowly, the power shifted. The ancient force began to shrink, retreating back into the prison beneath the earth, sealed once again by the combination of faith, truth, and courage. As silence fell, broken only by the patter of rain slowing to a gentle drizzle, Noah collapsed to his knees, exhausted but victorious. The flood was stopped, not by blind obedience, but by daring to confront the lies and face the darkness head-on. But just as relief began to wash over him, the boy looked up with a grave expression. This isn't the end. The cycle will try again. But now you hold the knowledge to change it. Noah nodded slowly, understanding that his battle was far from over. But for the first time, he knew the truth, and that truth was his weapon. Then, in the fading light, a whisper echoed through the chamber, chilling and clear. And what happens if the one who holds the key becomes the next warden? The final twist left Noah, and every soul watching, questioning not just the past or the present, but the very future itself. The flood had been stopped, but the real test was only just beginning. The storm had passed, leaving a sky washed clean and a world trembling with quiet possibility. Noah sat on the remnants of what once was, the ark now a symbol not just of survival, but of a hard-won truth. The waters that had threatened to erase everything had receded, but their echoes lingered in the air, a reminder of the fragile line between destruction and salvation. Around him, the faces of his family bore the weight of what they had endured: betrayal, fear, and the heavy burden of knowledge that now stretched beyond generations. Yet beneath it all, there was a new kind of hope, fragile but fiercely alive, born from the courage to challenge the cycle rather than surrender to it. Noah looked to the boy, whose mysterious origins and cryptic warnings had been the catalyst for this transformation, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that the future might be different, shaped not by prophecy or hidden agendas, but by choice. He understood now that the flood was never just a test of obedience or faith. It was a reckoning with the past and a crossroads for the future. The secrets hidden in the ancient chambers, the conspiracies threaded through time, and the darkness that had threatened to consume them all had been part of a story far bigger than himself. But this story wasn't finished. The cycle was broken, yes, but only temporarily, and the responsibility of what came next rested on their shoulders. Noah felt a quiet resolve settle in his heart, an understanding that true survival meant not just preserving life, but protecting truth and guarding against the shadows that lingered beneath the surface. The ark might have been built to carry them through the flood, but it was their faith in each other, their willingness to confront the unknown, that would carry them into the days ahead. As the sun rose, casting light over a changed world, Noah realized that peace was not found in forgetting or obedience, but in awareness and action. The boy's final words echoed in his mind. What happens if the one who holds the key becomes the next warden? It was a question that challenged everything he thought he knew about power, responsibility, and legacy. Noah didn't have an answer yet, but he knew the journey was far from over. He stood slowly, gazing out over the land that was both scarred and reborn, and felt a quiet promise form within him, to protect not just the world, but the truth that would one day set it free. And in that promise, there was something eternal, a reminder that even in the darkest storms, there is a spark of light strong enough to change everything. For Noah, for his family, and for every soul watching the skies, the story of the flood was no longer just a tale of survival, but a call to awaken, to question, and to fight for a future where hope could finally rise from the depths.